Welcome. We're here with Chuck and Janice Walton, who have a story to tell about their lifelong journey of following Jesus' command to make disciples of all nations. So, Chuck and Janice, thanks for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit about the first time that God grabbed a hold of your hearts for the nations?
I was 17 years old. I got back into reading the scriptures and I decided I should read through a book of the Bible, and I started in Isaiah. When I got to Isaiah 6, the passage really had a powerful impact on me. Isaiah's in the temple and he said, "I saw the Lord high and lifted up." And then he heard a voice say, "Who shall I send and who will go for us?" And Isaiah said, "Here am I, Lord, send me." And I think that was one of the most vivid times I have ever had in reading the scriptures, and it had a real strong effect on my life.
I was 13 and we had missions conferences at our church, and we had a fellow from Arab World Missions that came. And at the end of his message, he said, "Now, if any of you would be willing, if the Lord would call you to go and minister to Muslims, stand up." And I was sitting pretty close to the front row, and there were three of us that stood up. What he said next really got me, though, because he said, "If you're serious." And I thought, Lord, I don't know if I'm serious or not, but he said, "If you're serious, go home and tell your parents." And I thought, this is not going to go well. At that point in time, my dad was thinking he was an atheist, and I was the only daughter. I was the youngest one, so I had 3 strikes on that one. But I did. I went home and told my parents. And all I got from my dad was,
So it was your teenage years where God first got a hold of your hearts, but it wasn't until about your late 20s you were actually on a mission field. Can you take us through those early college years and maybe just how you two met and God continued to form this passion?
I met him when I was almost 15.
And I was 17 and a half. And we went to different schools together.
That works.
She went into nurses training and I went to Philadelphia Bible Institute. And then she went to University of Pennsylvania and I went to Wheaton. But we both knew we needed to get an education if we were going to serve the Lord. And so we held off and didn't get married until our education was pretty well finished.
I'd like to add something there. When I finished nurses training, Presbyterian Hospital in Philadelphia, and for some reason, I felt like I should go on and get my degree in nursing. And I applied to this school
Wheaton.
because Chuck was there and he was going to be there. And I thought, well, that would be pretty nice. I could be on campus. Chuck's on campus. But in the process of applying, the director of nurses at Presby called me into her office, and she had this letter of recommendation, and she hadn't signed it. And she had me sit down, and she said, "Miss Miller, are you really serious?" Again, this question, are you really serious about going on and getting your degree in nursing? And I said, yes. And she said, "Well, why Wheaton?" And I was like, do I tell her because my boyfriend's there? And I was like, well, Wheaton's a good school, and I think it would be nice. And she said, well, I know Wheaton. She said, it is a good school, it has a good program. But she said, if you wind up doing nursing out of the United States, and I thought, where did that come from? Because that little matter of if you're serious and if he calls you, it was there, but it wasn't there. And she said, a degree from the University of Pennsylvania would really stand you in good stead. She would have signed that recommendation, but I didn't use it. I applied to University of Penn.
So you got married. How old were you when you got married?
I was 25 and she was 22.
25 and 22.
She had one more year to go at Penn, and I had been working for 1 year teaching school in Philadelphia.
And Janice, you talked about in your early married years, saving up, looking for a house, but it was kind of a unique story that you kind of struck out on the house, right? And you had a particular thought about why, maybe?
It's again, I don't know the answer to the why.
But every time I made an appointment to go look at a property, the realtor called and said it's sold.
But you were thinking with a house, you might have sunk your roots a little bit, and it might have been really difficult to.
I was born in the house that I got married from.
So you're married, you don't have the house, but God used an encounter with an older lady to challenge you to consider missions.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that story.
When we got married, I was a member of a church in Bridesburg that had about 35 members. And because I graduated from Bible Institute in Wheaton, they made me Sunday school superintendent. And we had, even though the church had about 30 people in attendance, we had 100 in Sunday school. So Janice became a member of that church, and we felt this is the place we would minister. But they had an interest in missions, and they supported a couple of missionaries, and they had a missions conference. And there was a missionary from Central American Missions that we had known for a long time. And we had a potluck dinner, and she came and sat with Janice and me. And she said, you know, Chuck and Janice, you have all the training you would need to serve on the mission field. Have you ever thought of doing it? And we said, yes, we had. And she said, then why aren't you there? I said, rather pushy here. And I said, well, we don't have any sense of direction. She said, well, look, churches don't send out missionaries, and mission boards don't send out missionaries. And I took the bait and I said, then who does? She said, God does. And he does it in answer to prayer. So she quoted Luke 10:2, pray the Lord of the harvest, and he will send forth laborers into his harvest. So she said, would you be willing for me to pray for you every day that God would give you a sense of direction, whether to go or to whether to stay? There's no question that the work you're doing here is valuable for the kingdom, but God might want something else for you. So I looked at Janice and I said, what do you say? Are we willing for her to pray for us this way? And Janice said, yes. And then she said, okay, if you're willing for me to pray that for you every day, will you commit to praying that same prayer every day for yourself? That God would give you a sense of direction, whether to go or whether to stay. Now that was on Reformation Sunday, 1960.
Jeannie was 4 months old.
We prayed, we kept that up. And Janice wants closure, and I don't need closure. But Janice said, we really got to settle this. And so by January, we started writing to missions. We wrote to about 8 different missions. And we realized that my being a school teacher, Janice being a nurse, that Wycliffe had a place where we could serve. And so we decided to apply to Wycliffe Bible translators.
All right, so you apply to Wycliffe,
Mm-hmm.
and
We'll accept it.
you're accepted.
Well, they not yet. They said we have an orientation program, the end of which you would receive acceptance or not. And it's at the University of Oklahoma, and you go there for 9 weeks and take linguistic training, and then we'll let you know. So I asked for a leave of absence, and the director of the Board of Education accepted my resignation.
It's like, I think we burned that bridge.
We didn't intend to, but so we went to Oklahoma to study linguistics for a summer.
And Janice, you really wrestled with God
Oh, yeah.
while you were in Oklahoma. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I wrestled about linguistics. Last maiden name was Miller, very German name. We did not speak German in the home, but we had lots of neighbors in our home that did. So in high school, I decided to take German. And I was a pretty good student, except for German, and I almost flunked German, and to the point at which the German teacher said I wasn't trying, and he wrote a letter to my parents about this. So that was a downer, and I thought, I don't learn languages. That was not me. And here we are going to University of Oklahoma with Jeannie, who was a year old then, and I was expecting baby number 2. Yeah.
Done. So you got accepted to the mission organization, and that's when the fun really just starts to begin.
Yeah, they said, you did so well in the linguistics courses, you could be translators if you wanted to, which we hadn't really thought of. And so we thought, well, if we can qualify, why not try it? So we went to the field as translators and thinking, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, we can always fall back on nursing and teaching school.
And who would think that linguistics would lead you to the jungle first, right? So tell us a little bit about the process to get you to the field, which required some jungle training.
Part of our training, is that what you want to know? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I love Wycliffe. By the way, guys, you have to go and take 3 months of jungle camp training, okay?
In southern Mexico, right near the Guatemala border.
And at this point, you're not with baby number 2. Baby number 2's outside with you.
Ken decided to come 2 weeks late, so we went to southern Mexico with a 5-week-old baby, and Jeannie was a 1.5 years old. And we lived in a Champa at first, and it was
mud walls and a grass hut, grass roof, and
it was different.
yeah.
And it was a struggle for me. I had never been camping, and then we took a hike to a very, very, very remote place where there was nothing. Chuck had to build our shelter, and he had to make a mud stove.
Well, when we got there, you'd strung up jungle hammocks between trees, and you slept in jungle hammocks until you built a little house.
And it rained all week.
Of course.
And they told us there would be the native folks that would help, but it was Holy Week, so they didn't want to work. It was a very interesting time.
But the idea here is we would be living in a very remote area. We would be traveling by unreliable means in order to get there, in order to work with people at the end of beyond, who didn't have opportunity to hear the gospel. And so this is what we were facing, and so they prepared us well for that.
So you're prepared, and then you got to make a decision of where you're going to go. So you came down with a handful of countries, but eventually end up in the Philippines. But talk us through that process a little bit, how you ended up in the Philippines.
Part of our training was, in order to keep prices down, everybody had to work for 1 hour doing something. I worked cleaning pots and pans, and the guy I was working with was from the Philippines. And he kept saying to me, you really ought to come to the Philippines. We really have great needs there. So all summer long, he was saying to me, you really need to come to the Philippines. So that created a burden there.
But one of the reasons we kind of wrestled with that was because Chuck's younger brother had already gone to the Philippines. And so it was, are we interested in the Philippines because of the challenge from Frank, or are we interested because we know that Dick and Jerry are there? So we just gave it back to Wycliffe.
We said, these are 5 places, and these are the reasons we're thinking about it. You make the decision.
And they did.
They did.
Then I had to get a map out and figure out
where you were going.
Where was the Philippines?
So part of going to the field involves raising support. Can you tell us a little bit about Wycliffe's approach to support raising, and then how God showed his faithfulness to you?
Wycliffe had a policy that you could give full information, but no solicitation. You didn't tell people what your needs were. You just prayed and trusted the Lord to provide them. We had about 35% of our support pledged. And our director in the Philippines, he said, if you have 400 people on your prayer letter list and 100 people who have committed to pray for you, come. And so we decided to go with 35% pledged.
So you go to the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what was it like to be raising a family in a new place, new country, new culture?
When we arrived in the Philippines, then it was decision time in terms of where we would work. And that matter of working with Muslims, both of us were in agreement. And there were Muslim needs, quote needs, in the southern Philippines, but they were not really well defined by the Philippine branch of Wycliffe. And so they asked us to go to the northern part of the Philippines to work with one of the language groups up there. Jeannie was 3, Ken was a year and a half. Jeannie was out with the kids, and she picked up the language, to my shame, because I was struggling. And Ken, when he was learning to talk, he was totally bilingual from the very beginning. Chuck would take him out while he would be visiting with the men and learning language, and he'd identify something in English, and Ken would answer in Eatnug. Or if Chuck said something in Eatnug, Ken would answer in English. So the matter of language and acculturation was very, very strong with the kids. Furlough time, what you call it, your home leave for a year. Back then it was 5 years
On the field, and then 1 year home.
and then 1 year home. And we were coming home. The kids were not. Lois, so child number 3, was born while we were there, our first term. And they were not coming home.
And an indication of this is we ended up living with a family, and Soto, the man of the family, our kids really identified with them very closely. And one day, Ken was sitting on Soto's lap, and he says, I know in America I have some uncles, but Soto is my really, truly uncle.
So we had 5 years in the northern Philippines and had started translated
Mark, 15 stories on the life of Christ,
1st, 2nd, and 3rd John.
1st, 2nd, 3rd John, and James.
And James. And it was decided, because of a high level of bilingualism, the Binungan Itnog people didn't need to have a translation, a separate translation. We saw the church get turned around during those 5 years. We saw them really into the Word and actually going out and evangelizing and church planting. So Wycliffe SIL said, you know what? We need you, Mr. Walton, to be leading up language survey for all of the Philippines. So we came back from our first furlough, and that was really, really hard for our kids. Now at this point we had the 4th child, Andy. It didn't matter to him, he was too little. But the 3 older ones were going to live in the southern Philippines, and were going to be living at the translation center, not going home to Baay. The only plus about that for our children was there was a school there. So that was a big thing for me, because I had been homeschooling Jeannie, and my determination was I would be homeschooling my children.
But because there was a mission school at the center, our children were able to go to the missions.
To school. And it was during that time the surveyors were able to identify the Muslim groups in the South that really needed translation. And so by the end of that 5 years, Chuck was associate director also. He was wearing 3 different hats. It's good for a bald-headed guy, 3 different hats. They wanted him to come back and still be associate director. And we just felt really strongly the Lord wanted us in one of those Muslim tribal areas. There was only one of the ones that had a need,
The Muslim groups.
of the Muslim groups that needed a team. And so we said, okay, Lord, that's us. That meant separation. Andy went with us to be homeschooled. Jeannie was high school at Faith Academy in Manila, and Ken and Lois were able to be at the school at Nasali. And they were settled to the point, they were more settled than Mom was, but they were okay. So we go as Bible translators. I was still a nurse on a remote island in the southern Philippines, 100% Muslim.
We lived in a displaced language area because there was a war for independence going on. And the government wouldn't let us go live on the island of Pangataran, which was the homeland of the language, because the government didn't control it. So we lived in a displaced location for a number of years. And then finally we were able to go live on the homeland.
I know being on the field, there's highs and lows. And so let's just take a minute and can you just share some of the real challenges of being on the field, some of the greatest trials, challenges that you guys faced?
I was not prepared for the strength with which they wanted to convert us.
Yeah, and you found that a much more confrontational or hostile area than the North.
Well, the first place that we lived for the first 8 years, they weren't as confrontational. They were just very assertive. I guess I would use that word. But very much entrenched in Islam.
We realized that the work we were doing, people were interested in, but somebody was undermining it. So the leader who owned the house we lived in was actually undermining the work we were doing, telling people, don't pay any attention to this. And he was a wealthy man of great influence.
Yeah.
But even when we did transfer over to the homeland, when we tried to get people to take scripture we had translated, they said, I'll try to come back and get it another time. Because when I leave here, I'll be questioned. So people were being interrogated after they left our house. Yeah.
Well, take a U-turn here and just maybe share a few of the great joys of, as you reflect back on your ministry and mission. What are some of the joys that kind of stand out?
Working with the Binongan Itnog.
In the north.
Yeah, we still keep saying those were probably the 5 happiest years. Not really.
Some of the
Never hard
best years
times.
of our lives, really.
Just the people there were so welcoming, and again, that would be your contrast, the shocker. I can't remember too many stories.
What, are you back here again? I thought you left for good. That was in the South with a Muslim group.
But I guess the joy in even working with a resistant Muslim group would be having someone like Musa come over to the little house in Pangataran, the second place that we lived, the most resistant place. A young mother, a second wife, and she was really hungry. And to realize that hunger was there, and there were others, not very many, but there were others that were hungry.
You know, there are little things that happened over and over again that were just amazing. One morning early, I got a knock at the door, and there was a young man there, and he said, "Are you the one that printed those books?"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "What do you mean? The books about teaching reading?" He said, "No. the scriptures. He said, I just arrived here. This is in a displaced location. I arrived here from Pangutaran, and I had seen these books, and I want them. So he had shown up. He got several copies of Gospels, and I never saw him again.
And your work with translation ultimately led to a completed New Testament?
A completed New Testament, yes.
And you continue work with the Filipino National to this day, doing translation work still, correct?
Right now, we're part of what you do is you got to make a dictionary. And one of the things I'm doing right now with him is to revise the dictionary. He's kind of bored with it, but it's the kind of thing we ought to do, you know, and we'll make it available online for the community back there. But we have done further translation. So we revised Genesis, Exodus, we translated Esther, a number of Psalms, and Isaiah, and what else?
And the Jesus film is...
Yeah, we've got the Jesus film ready to go, but I can't go back to do it. So when it gets done, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Well, making a decision to go to the field has challenges. How would you encourage people who might be considering serving as they consider those challenges? What advice would you have for people like that?
Pray. I mean, really, I think about Irene Clifton's challenge to us. Pray, Lord, am I to go or am I to stay? And never mind all the little but. If the Lord wants you there, He's going to get you there.
Well, one of the things here is you need to grow where you're planted, right where you are now, and do everything you can right now where you are. And look for guidance. And as Janice just said, prayer. It's got to begin with prayer. Prayer has to carry you through it. Prayer all the way through to the end and afterwards. It's just a constant thing. We can't do it ourselves. And only through God working through us. But the other thing is, we're told, we often set our eyes on evangelizing. And often we think, well, I can do that quickly. But the command is to go and make disciples. And you don't do that quickly. It takes time. And it takes investment in people's lives. And some of the greatest blessing I've received is the deep friendships I have made with people out there, closer relationships than anything I've had back here. You know, William Carey had this argument with the group of pastors that he was in. And they said, oh, the command to go and reach the nations, that was for the disciples only. And Carey said, well, wait a minute. What about, lo, I am with you always? And they said, oh, that's for us. And Carey said, well, if the promise is for you, so is the command. And that's one of the things we, you know, our experience is God has been with us through everything, all of that.
Well, you guys have been on quite a journey, and I thank you for sharing part of that journey with us, and get to see God's faithfulness and the sacrifice that you guys have made to be a part of all this. I just have one final question for you. Would you do it again?
Sure.
Any time I hear a story about someone reporting about their work from the field, it's, I want to go.
All right. Well, thank you so much for just taking the time to unpack your story with us. And
I like your socks.
Cut that.